Hi, I'm Serena. At my father's memorial, my brother walked over, cracked open a soda, and poured it on my sandwich. Then he looked me in the eye and said, "Dad would be ashamed of you." But that wasn't the first time he tried to erase me. It started long before. Quiet exclusions, group messages I wasn't part of, meetings I was never told about. They said I was dramatic, complicated, better left out. And somehow, I started to believe them. But then I found the letter, the one my father wrote before he died, hidden in a box, behind a lining. Why did he write it in secret? What were they trying so hard to keep me from knowing? And what happens when the forgotten daughter stops staying quiet? You'll want to hear this. The sun was too bright for a day like this. It pierced through the stained glass windows of the church, like it hadn't gotten the memo that mourning was meant to be muted. I stepped inside, adjusting my sunglasses before tucking them away. People were already whispering, coats perfectly pressed, lips painted just right, grief curated like an art piece. I walked past rows of my relatives, some I hadn't seen in years, most of whom avoided eye contact. My name wasn't spoken, just a few raised eyebrows and side glances, like I was the one who died. They'd seated me in the back, 3 rows behind my cousin Claire, who hadn't visited my father once in his last year. The only available seat was next to a man I barely recognized, one of Gideon's business friends, I think. When I asked a nearby usher if I could move forward, he just offered a tight smile and said, "Those seats are reserved." So I sat. The service was what you'd expect when the person being remembered was rewritten into a version acceptable for public consumption. My father, Arthur Crane, was described as a pillar of generosity, a family man, a mentor. No mention of the years he stopped speaking to me. No acknowledgement that I cared for him when his mind started slipping. Just stories that made everyone feel warm and included, even those who'd done nothing. Afterward, there was a small reception in the community room, a light lunch set up, courtesy of Gideon. A fold-out table lined with grocery store sandwich trays, a soda cooler, and plastic utensils. He probably spent more on his cufflinks today than the entire spread. I walked over, grabbed a sandwich, and sat down alone at a table in the corner. That's when he came over. Gideon didn't even look at me as he cracked open a can of soda. He walked past the cooler like it wasn't even there, stood next to me, and without a word, poured the entire can over my sandwich. The fizz soaked into the bread instantly. I looked up, stunned. He finally met my eyes, leaned in slightly, and said it, clear enough for those nearby to hear. "Dad would be ashamed of you showing your face here." No one gasped. No one intervened. No one even looked surprised. Just a few tight smirks from his circle of admirers, and a quiet turn of heads from others. I didn't say anything, didn't throw the sandwich, didn't cry. I stood up slowly, set the dripping plate on the edge of the table, and walked out the side door. The air outside was cooler, quieter. I inhaled deeply, letting the hum of the highway beyond the church parking lot ground me. The same street I used to ride my bike down as a kid. My hands weren't shaking. Not yet. Not even with that humiliation still dripping off my fingertips. I heard small footsteps behind me and turned. Lily, Gideon's youngest, was standing there. She couldn't have been more than 6. Freckles, braids, little white sandals that didn't quite fit. "Why did Uncle Gideon mess up your food?" she asked, eyes wide with the kind of honest curiosity only a child could carry. I bent down so we were eye level. She looked confused, but not cruel. Her voice had no edge. "Sometimes," I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Grown-ups forget their manners, sweetheart." She nodded like it made perfect sense, then ran back inside to find her cousins. I stayed outside. I didn't want to go back in. Not for the watered-down lemonade. Not for the fake hugs. Not for another second of pretending we were still a family. I walked across the lot toward my car, passing people who avoided my gaze. I slid into the driver's seat and looked to the passenger side. The bouquet I brought sat untouched. I'd hoped to place it somewhere inside, some small, respectful gesture. Now it felt pointless. I stared at the steering wheel, trying to remember the last time Dad and I had laughed together. Not spoken, laughed. It was over 2 years ago, maybe more. We were on his back porch. He made some terrible joke about squirrels eating the political signs in his yard. I'd laughed until my side hurt. That version of him was gone long before his heart stopped. My phone buzzed. A message from Aunt Grace. "Ignore your brother. He's stressed. Be the bigger person." I stared at the screen, the words burning into my retinas. Be the bigger person. Again. I didn't respond. Instead, I whispered to no one in particular. What if I'm tired of being the bigger person? I dropped the phone onto the passenger seat like it was something contagious. The weight of Aunt Grace's message still sat heavy in my chest, but not in the way it used to. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It felt more like fatigue, a bone-deep weariness that settles in when you've been carrying a silence that doesn't belong to you. Instead of heading home, I turned right at the intersection. A few blocks later, I parked outside a small cafe with faded blue trim and an old bell above the door that jingled when you entered. It used to be my dad's favorite spot for Sunday coffee before he started preferring quiet over company. I hadn't been back in years, but the booth near the window was still there, untouched, like time had circled around it. I ordered a plain coffee, no frills, and slid into the booth. It was late afternoon. Sunlight hit the table at a soft angle. My reflection danced across the window in a way that made me look younger, or maybe just more tired. I checked my phone again. 3 new texts. Sorry about Gideon, he didn't mean it. You looked tense today, hope you're okay. Let's all try to move forward. All from different cousins, polite, polished, pointless. I didn't answer any of them. 2 more people walked in, my cousins Naomi and Trevor. They didn't see me, or maybe they pretended not to. They grabbed a table 2 booths behind mine, just far enough to make their voices feel safe. I heard Dad left her nothing, Naomi whispered, as she sipped from a to-go cup that probably cost more than the sandwich tray at the memorial. She pushed too hard before he passed. That's what Aunt Vera said? Trevor leaned in. She wasn't even at the estate meetings, like, not invited at all. Naomi let out a breathy laugh. She's lucky they let her show up at the funeral. Gideon's being generous. They paused when the server approached. I stared down at my coffee. Not because it surprised me, but because the lack of surprise told me everything. I didn't move. I didn't correct them. I didn't stand up and defend myself like I used to when I was 15 and still believed justice came with volume. I just let the words float over me like bad air, like the aftersmoke of a fire I didn't start, but always had to breathe in. After they left, I finished my coffee in silence, placed a few bills under the mug, and walked out. I didn't feel brave or enlightened. I just felt done. Instead of going home, I drove back toward the church. I realized I'd left my dad's cufflinks, his real ones, not the ones on display, by the guest book table. I'd meant to keep them. They were the only thing of his I'd been allowed to bring without someone raising a fuss. The church was quiet, the parking lot nearly empty. I walked inside and paused by the memorial board. It was new, a large white frame with printed photos and a gold-trimmed header that read, "In loving memory from Gideon Rain and family." I scanned the names listed beneath. Gideon, his wife, their kids, a few distant relatives. Then one name stood out. Serena Crane. I stared at it. Not Serena. Serena. It wasn't a typo, it was a message. A subtle way to let me know I didn't belong, even in typeface. I pulled my phone out, snapped a picture, and then stood there, unsure whether to laugh or scream or just walk away. In the end, I did none of those. I left the cufflinks, let them have it all. The board, the memories, the version of Dad that made them look good. Back in the car, I drove past our old house, now Gideon's. The shutters were painted navy blue now. The porch had been rebuilt, and there was a shiny new mailbox with a digital lock. I didn't stop, didn't slow down. Instead, my mind started cataloging the pattern. The time I wasn't copied on the group email about Dad's surgery. The Christmas when my gift got lost in the shuffle. The meeting invite that never came, but was just an oversight. One cut doesn't kill you, but 1,000 tiny ones? That's a different story. Later that night, I sat on my couch, scrolling through social media, trying to numb myself with other people's filtered lives. That's when I saw it. Gideon's wife had posted a photo from the memorial. All smiles, all staged. Captioned, "Beautiful tribute by our family." I wasn't in a single frame, not even a corner reflection in a glass panel. No tags, no mention. It hit me, not like a punch, but like a slow realization. I wasn't just mourning the man who raised me. I was mourning the illusion that I'd ever truly been part of that family. I didn't sleep much after seeing that post. I lay there in the half-dark, staring at the ceiling like it might offer answers, or at least a crack to slip through. My phone buzzed once at midnight. I didn't check it. Whatever it was could wait until morning. When the sun finally edged through the blinds, I slid out of bed, walked barefoot to the drawer near my kitchen counter, and pulled it open. Buried under a stack of grocery coupons and expired medication guides was a brochure from Mercy General. The cover read, "Navigating Memory Care, a Guide for Families." It had been there for nearly 2 years, untouched, folded in half. Holding it felt like opening a time capsule you never asked to bury. And just like that, I was back there. The hallway smelled like disinfectant and something metallic I could never quite place. I remember the coldness of the floor through my shoes, the echo of footsteps that didn't belong to me. It had been a Thursday. I brought a grocery bag with peanut butter crackers, ginger ale, and crossword books, things he used to enjoy. When I approached the nurse's station, I smiled and asked for room 214. The nurse's face tightened. "I'm sorry," she said. "Visitation access has been revoked for you by the immediate family." My brain paused, like a computer buffering mid-sentence. "I'm sorry, what?" She hesitated, then turned the monitor toward me. On the screen, next to the line marked "Restricted Visitors," was my name. Plain as day. Requested by Isolde Rain. I didn't argue, not because I agreed, but because there's a particular type of humiliation that doesn't need an audience. I sat in the hallway, hours passing as slowly as melting ice. Occasionally, a nurse would glance my way, pity softening their expression before duty pulled them elsewhere. No one came out, no one sent word. Later, one of the night shift aides passed by and whispered, "Your brother's been managing the list. He's been strict, said your visits cause stress." I nodded, but I didn't really hear her. All I could think was, he was in that room. My father was still breathing, and I was 10 feet away, not allowed to say goodbye. That door stayed closed. When I left the hospital that night, the sky had turned that indigo shade right before full dark. I sat in my car and didn't start it for 20 minutes. I just stared at the glow of the parking lot lights against my windshield and let myself feel it, really feel it. Later that week, I heard from a college friend, Jen. She asked if I'd be attending the funeral planning meeting on Saturday. "What meeting?" I asked. "Didn't they add you to the group thread?" She replied, then sent me a screenshot. There it was. A group chat with 15 family members. Conversations, date polls, photo selections. My name was nowhere in the thread. When I called my mother, she didn't hesitate. "It was better this way," she said, her tone clipped, less confusing. "For who?" I asked. She didn't answer. I wrote a eulogy anyway. I printed it on heavy cream cardstock, folded it into thirds, practiced it out loud once, then tucked it in the drawer beneath my bed. They never called on me to speak. The time slot was given to Gideon's boss, someone who hadn't seen my father outside of holiday parties. I sat in the second-to-last row during the service, not because I arrived late, but because the first rows were reserved. By then, I wasn't surprised. I was tired, and the line between shock and acceptance had thinned until it was almost transparent. I still have the speech. Sometimes, on evenings when I can't fall asleep, I read it back to myself. Not to remember my father, but to remember the version of me who still thought my words mattered to them. Now, I look at the folder on my bookshelf. It's labeled Estate Information, thick with paperwork I haven't dared to sort. I stand, walk to it, and run a hand across its spine. Cold, smooth, unbothered. If I couldn't say goodbye, I whisper, I'll at least make sure I'm not forgotten. The folder felt heavier in my hands than it looked. I carried it to the kitchen counter, placed it next to my untouched cup of tea, and stared at it for a long time. I hadn't planned to open it that day. Honestly, I thought I'd let it gather dust until the edges curled, but something had shifted in me. Maybe it was the way my mother's name appeared on the hospital's access revoked form. Maybe it was hearing whispers in cafes from people who thought I couldn't hear. Or maybe it was finally realizing that silence wasn't protection. It was erasure. I turned on my laptop, not to look at the documents yet, but to pull up the video from the memorial service. Gideon's wife had posted the full slideshow, 26 minutes long, background piano music, quotes in cursive fonts, family moments presented like they belonged to a Hallmark commercial. I watched the entire thing, and I wasn't in it. Not a single picture of me. Not even the grainy ones from when I was 10 and Dad still came to my school plays. Just Gideon, Vera, their kids, and the occasional throwback photo of our parents at formal events. The caption beneath the final photo read, "A life built for legacy." I laughed, just once, sharp and bitter. Then I whispered, "Just not mine, apparently." I closed the video, opened my contacts, and pressed call on the one person I'd avoided the longest. It rang 3 times before she answered. "Serena!" My mother's voice sounded surprised, polished, like she was already preparing her tone for company. "I just have one question," I said. "Why was I excluded from everything?" There was a pause on her end, too long to be anything but intentional. "I didn't think this would help anyone," she replied carefully. "You have a way of stirring things, and this wasn't the time for tension." I clenched my jaw. "You mean honesty," she sighed. "Sometimes peace matters more than truth." That did it. That was the sentence. The final unraveling. "You're not protecting peace," I said, voice low. "You're protecting comfort. Yours, his, Gideon's, and I've been the cost of that for years." "Serena," she started. I ended the call before she could finish the sentence. After a while, I returned to the slideshow and paused on the last frame. Gideon and his kids, grinning wide, holding a glass trophy that read, "Family of the Year," as if it had been earned, as if the rest of us never existed. I opened my phone gallery. In it, dozens of pictures of me and Dad, picnics, fishing trips, even a blurry selfie from his hospital room before the restrictions. Photos no one had asked for, memories no one wanted. They weren't just forgetting me. They were curating around me. I sat back and stared at the ceiling, letting it all settle in. For years, I thought if I didn't make waves, I might still be welcome on the shore. But now, the tide had already gone out, and I wasn't standing on sand. I was standing on concrete. If being seen makes people uncomfortable, I murmured to myself, maybe I was born to unsettle. I opened a new email draft and typed the address of the family's estate lawyer. Not to plead, not to argue, just to state. Subject: Inquiry regarding beneficiary documentation. In the body, I wrote, "Dear Mr. Levins, I am writing to request a formal review of any and all legal documentation regarding Arthur Crane's estate, specifically in relation to listed beneficiaries. I expect transparency and access to full documentation. Attached, you will find a file of financial contributions and correspondence previously excluded from family record. Thank you for confirming receipt and next steps. Regards, Serena Crane." I hovered over the send button. Then I added one more line at the bottom. If I'm not in the slideshow, I need to make sure I'm not written out of the documents too. And I clicked. I didn't expect a response that fast. Less than 24 hours after hitting send, I got a reply from the lawyer. Polite. Formal. Coded in legal tone, so smooth it almost masked the gut punch inside. Dear Ms. Crane, per your inquiry, please be advised that Mr. Gideon Rain has submitted final amendments to the estate file. All assets are currently designated to him as primary beneficiary, effective under the directive filed and notarized on March 3, 2021. Given confidentiality clauses and administrative direction, only listed parties are entitled to review said documents. Best, Levins and Ward, LLP. I reread it twice before setting my phone down. No mention of my name. No reference to any pending clarification. Just a firm legal wall, politely built. I dialed the number at the bottom of the email. A receptionist answered, transferring me to a junior associate whose voice sounded like she was fresh out of law school. Hi, I said, keeping my voice level. This is Serena Crane. I just received notice regarding the estate amendments. Can you confirm if I am, or am not, considered a beneficiary? A pause. I'm sorry, Ms. Crane. I'm only permitted to speak in general terms unless you're listed on file. So that's a no. Silence again. I'll note that you called, she said. I hung up. I could have screamed. Instead, I opened LinkedIn to distract myself, if only to put my focus on something else. I scrolled through updates, job promotions, anniversary posts. Then I saw Gideon's face, a photo of him standing beside our father's hospital bed, smiling, holding Dad's hand. The caption read, "Caring for my father through his final year was the most profound experience of my life. Full-time caregiver, advocate, son. Rest well, Dad." Over 500 likes, dozens of comments. You're a hero. He was lucky to have you. Incredible devotion. I stared at it like I'd been slapped. Not because of the lie, but because of how easily it was accepted. The internet, after all, only needs a picture and a polished sentence to crown someone a saint. I remembered being the one who booked his home nurse, who sat in ER lobbies until 3 a.m., who battled insurance claims while still making rent. I remembered missing work to clean up after falls, wash laundry, pay for new prescriptions when Medicare wouldn't cover them. Gideon visited maybe once a week. He brought cookies and took selfies. And now he was writing history with my hands. I took a screenshot and sent it to him with one line. You forgot to tag the person who did all the work. No reply. Of course. So I posted my own message. Not direct, not aggressive, just pointed enough. Sometimes the loudest legacy is built on borrowed hands, and sometimes those hands stop clapping. 3 people messaged me privately. Is this about your brother? You okay? I ignored them. I didn't need a sympathy circle. I needed facts. That afternoon, I pulled out a shoebox I'd kept in the hall closet. It was full of receipts, appointment cards, mileage logs, everything I'd saved, not because I planned to use it, but because I was taught to always document what you give, especially when no one's keeping score. Now I was. I scanned every paper into my laptop, dated each file, sorted it into folders. Medical, transportation, expenses, notes. I found an email trail with Dad's primary physician that had only my name on it. When I finished, I wrote another email, this time to the firm's senior partner. Subject, request for neutral estate review, dear Mr. Ward. As a party who directly contributed time, care, and financial support to Arthur Crane in the final 18 months of his life, I am submitting formal documentation to request a neutral review of all related estate documents. Attached, please find scanned copies of verified appointments, payments, and correspondence. I understand your office has a duty to follow directives, but fairness and accuracy are worth equal attention. Respectfully, Serena Crane, that night, I slept with the windows open, the breeze cutting through the quiet like truth slicing through fiction. The next morning, a new email sat at the top of my inbox. Ms. Crane, your request has been escalated for internal review. Please be advised that Mr. Rain has formally contested your claims. Additional documentation may be requested. I leaned back in my chair, eyes narrowing, a smirk rising slowly, without ever touching joy. Good, I whispered. Let's make it a contest worth watching. The email had barely cooled in my inbox before I was grabbing my keys and a file folder. I didn't wait for Gideon to stew or for my mother to call with another lecture about dignity. I needed proof. Not memories, not feelings. Something they couldn't twist into a narrative that suited their version of legacy. The old storage unit sat behind a chain-link gate, not far from the house I grew up in. I hadn't visited since Dad passed. The keypad was faded, the digits sticking slightly as I typed the code. When the lock clicked open, a draft of cool air hit my face, thick with dust and disuse. Inside were boxes, a few faded furniture pieces, and 2 filing cabinets pushed against the back wall. My name wasn't on anything, but I remembered Dad used to keep old paperwork here. Tax records, manuals, and a manila folder he called the vault. I opened the top drawer of the second cabinet. Near the back, behind an envelope of old family photos and some utility bills, was a folder labeled Draft, 18 months before passing. My hands tingled. I sat on the cold concrete floor, unfolded the flap, and read. It was a draft will, typed, initialed, 2 pages, and on the second page, clear as daylight, was a line that read, "All remaining assets are to be distributed equally between my children, Gideon Rain and Serena Crane." I flipped to the back. A yellow sticky note clung to the page. Update after final diagnosis. Keep this until next appointment. I sat there for several minutes, letting it sink in. This wasn't hearsay. This wasn't some exaggerated memory. This was his intent, his unfiltered voice, quieted by those who preferred me absent. I drove straight to the pharmacy to pick up toner, then to the FedEx office to scan the document. I wasn't going to walk into another meeting or call empty-handed again. As I stepped out of the store, I heard a familiar voice say my name. "Serena?" I turned. Mrs. Calloway, Dad's home nurse, gray cardigan, orthopedic sneakers, the same kind eyes that used to linger on me whenever I visited the hospital. We exchanged pleasantries for a moment before her expression shifted. "He used to ask for you," she said softly. "Every time I walked in, he'd say, 'Is she coming today?'" My stomach tightened. She glanced around before continuing. "Someone always told him you weren't returning his calls, but he never seemed to believe it." My voice came out hoarse. "I never got any calls." She touched my arm gently. "I know." That night, I dug through my old phone records. 6 missed calls from blocked numbers, all with the same area code as the hospital. They weren't spam, they were Dad. Someone, Gideon or my mother or both, had made sure I never heard them ring. The next day, I sat across from a new attorney, one not connected to the family. I laid the scanned draft on her desk. "It's not the final will," I said, "but it shows intent, and I can prove suppression." She adjusted her glasses, read through the document, and nodded. "This could hold weight, especially if we can show motive to conceal it." I handed her the phone logs, the emails, the receipts, a timeline of care that had gone unpaid and uncredited. "I wasn't looking for drama," I said, "but I'm no longer walking out of rooms to keep the peace." That night, I opened a new email to the estate attorney. Subject: Submission of additional documentation. Mr. Levins, please find attached a scanned copy of a draft authored by Arthur Crane, dated 18 months prior to his passing. This version reflects an equal distribution of assets between both heirs. Also included are phone records indicating intentional interference with end-of-life communication, as well as supporting financial documentation. I request this material be formally evaluated for legal significance. Regards, Serena Crane. 10 minutes later, a reply came. Acknowledged. We will notify the primary beneficiary of this submission. I clicked reply. Do that. I want him to see it. I didn't need to wait long. By the next morning, My cousin Ellie messaged me with a screenshot from the family group chat. I hadn't been in that thread since before Dad got sick. Apparently, my name was still floating in it, just not with any kindness attached. She's just bitter. This is her last play. That was from Gideon. Another cousin added a laughing emoji. Ellie wrote underneath her screenshot, "I'm sorry, Serena. I thought they'd at least talk to you directly." They wouldn't. That was the point. Keep the whispers private, then act shocked when I responded. But it didn't stop there. That afternoon, my phone rang. I recognized the number. Vera. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Serena," she began, her voice syrupy sweet, almost performative. "I heard you've been stirring the pot again, filing things, making people uncomfortable." "I'm requesting what's mine," I said. That tends to make people who've taken more than they should uncomfortable. She laughed, soft and slow. "You know, your father once told me you were the biggest mistake he ever made." My mouth went dry, but I didn't answer. I tapped the record button on my call app. "He wanted peace in his final months," she continued. "But you? You dragged everything into drama. He wanted dignity, and you—" "Vera!" I cut in, my voice even. "This call is being recorded." Silence. I let her sit in it. Then, without another word, I hung up. Later that evening, I was reviewing scanned files when another message arrived. It was from an unknown number. No text, just an audio file. I debated opening it. Part of me didn't want to hear one more thing. But instinct won, I played it. Two voices, clear. My mother and Gideon. "She's unpredictable," Gideon said. "If she gets up there and says anything about what actually happened, it'll unravel everything we've built." "Then don't give her the chance," my mother replied. "Control the guest list, make it clean." "I've already taken care of it." My heart didn't drop. It settled. Because this time, I wasn't shocked. I was validated. I forwarded the recording, along with the call log from Vera, to the estate lawyer. My message was simple. "Please add these to my formal claim. I'm requesting we escalate to mediation. Going forward, I will only respond to communications that are witnessed or recorded." 2 minutes later, confirmation. "Understood. Request for formal mediation has been logged. Your brother's legal counsel will be included moving forward." I closed the laptop. Outside, wind pressed against the window, like something trying to get in. Or maybe something trying to get out. I stared at the reflection in the dark glass. "They want war," I said quietly, "with the woman they taught how to fight." I arrived at the legal office 15 minutes early. Not because I was nervous, but because I refused to be the one rushing in, out of breath, trying to prove I belonged. The conference room was colder than expected. Polished glass walls, heavy mahogany table, bottled water lined like little soldiers at each seat. I took the chair on the far side, closest to the window. Let them walk past me. Let them feel what it was like to sit across from someone they'd written off. Gideon entered first. His lawyer trailed behind him, a younger man with slicked back hair and a smugness he probably mistook for confidence. Vera followed, dressed like she was attending a brunch instead of a mediation. She didn't look at me. The moderator, a gray-haired woman with a demeanor sharp enough to slice through tension, called us to order. "Let's begin." Gideon leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "Let's just end this quickly. You're only here out of courtesy." I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled a thick envelope from my leather folder and slid it across the table. Inside, you'll find copies of payment logs, email chains, appointment schedules, and correspondences with medical staff from the last 18 months of our father's life, I said calmly. "All in my name, all verified." The moderator flipped through the first few pages. Her pen clicked. Notes began. Gideon shifted slightly. "I also included notarized bank statements showing that the home nurse costs you claimed in your filing were actually covered by me." His attorney blinked, then leaned in to whisper something. Gideon didn't look at him. "Additionally," I continued, opening a smaller folder, "there's this." I laid a single faded Walgreens receipt in the center of the table. Emergency meds, 14 months ago, $283.47. Dad couldn't breathe. I drove 2 hours, paid in cash. Silence. Vera shifted in her seat. If love is measured in invoices, I said, my voice flat, I'll win this contest by miles. Gideon cleared his throat, his tone defensive. She's weaponizing care. That's not the point of this hearing. I looked him straight in the eye. You weaponized absence, I said evenly. I weaponized proof. The moderator didn't look up. Mr. Rain, your claims will be reassessed. For now, this documentation necessitates pause. She turned to me. Ms. Crane, do you have anything further at this time? Not yet, I said, but I'm not done. The room was dismissed. People stood, gathered their things. As I reached the door, Vera stepped beside me. Her voice low, barely a whisper. This won't bring him back. I paused. Then I turned, not with anger, but with finality. I know, I said, but it brings me back to myself. And I kept walking. I didn't drive straight home after mediation. I made a detour, just needed air that hadn't been pressed between glass conference walls, and waited with history no one wanted to tell truthfully. By the time I walked through my front door, the sun had dipped behind the rooflines, casting my living room in that dusky orange that always made everything feel like memory. I placed my folder on the coffee table and sat down slowly, feeling each part of my body ask me, Are you done yet? I wasn't. My eyes landed on an old wooden chest beneath the bookshelf. It had been my dad's. I hadn't opened it since the day I carried it out of his house. It had sat quietly in the corner, never demanding attention. Much like me, I realized. I pulled it out and opened the lid. Inside were odds and ends, a fishing reel, his glasses case, a few receipts and napkins with illegible notes, and tucked behind the lining, almost invisible, was a yellowed envelope, unsealed but worn at the edges. No name on the outside. Just that familiar block handwriting on the card inside. Serena. My throat tightened. The letter was dated 4 weeks before he passed. The ink wobbled slightly. His hand had started to shake more by then, but every word was unmistakably his. Serena, I know I didn't say enough, and what I did say wasn't always kind, but I've been watching your strength. The way you care, even when no one acknowledges it. Don't let them erase your worth. You're not invisible, not to me. I asked the lawyer to make updates. I hope they reached you. If they didn't, I'm sorry, I tried. Please forgive me for the silence. It wasn't absence, it was fear. That last line unraveled me. Not in a dramatic way, quietly, deeply. A tremor that started in my chest and moved through the rest of me. I held the letter against my heart and closed my eyes. Later that night, I opened my laptop and typed Gideon's name into a search bar. Not because I missed him, but because I was finally ready to see what he'd been saying. It didn't take long. There it was, a long post on his professional blog, dated 2 days after Dad's funeral. Title, The Only Son of Arthur Crane. He'd written about legacy, about sacrifice, about how guiding our father through his final months had been a sacred duty only a son could understand. There were photos, ones I'd never seen. Him holding Dad's hand, him at Dad's bedside, him at Dad's grave. I wasn't in a single one. Not even as a name. He'd rewritten the entire story, cast himself as the sole heir of memory, and erased everything that didn't serve his narrative. Comments filled the bottom of the post. Beautiful tribute. Your dad would be so proud. What a bond you shared. It wasn't just theft of property anymore. It was theft of identity. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't need to. Instead, I took the letter, scanned it carefully, and printed 2 copies. One for my mediation file, and one for my own wall. Not as proof, but as reminder. Then, I emailed the scanned version to my lawyer. No explanation, just a subject line. If truth is inconvenient, let's make it undeniable. The next morning, I posted a photo to my personal page, one I'd taken 5 years ago, just me and Dad on the edge of the lake, rods in hand, sun reflecting off the water. The caption was a single quote from his letter: "Don't let them erase your worth." No hashtags, no name-calling, just truth. By lunch, it had been shared a dozen times. By dinner, it had found its way to the extended family chat. I didn't need to say anything more. I didn't flinch when I saw Gideon across the room. Not this time. The final hearing was set in a downtown legal suite. Modern, sterile, designed to impress. Everything smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. I walked in alone, folder tucked under my arm, heels clicking with purpose. No one was going to mistake my presence for hesitation again. Arthur Deems was already waiting in the hall outside. He stood straighter than most men his age, but the cane in his right hand betrayed the years. When he saw me, he nodded and extended a small envelope. "He trusted me to hold on to this," he said. "I think he knew you'd need it one day." My fingers tightened around the envelope, but I didn't open it. Not yet. Inside the hearing room, Gideon was seated at the opposite table with his attorney. Vera hovered near the door, likely there for drama, not substance. The moderator gave us all a cursory greeting before motioning us to sit. "Let's proceed." Gideon's lawyer began by repeating their position: finalized documents, uncontested transfers, history of consistent involvement. When he finished, the moderator turned to me. "Ms. Crane, your response?" I stood, opened the envelope Arthur had given me, and slid the contents forward. It was a handwritten will, dated, signed, and notarized. Clear, unmistakable. Arthur added, "I was there when he signed it. He asked me to deliver it if Serena was ever left out." The room shifted. I looked directly at Gideon. "This will designates both of us as co-beneficiaries. But more importantly, it includes a clause." The moderator skimmed the document, then read aloud. "If this document is contested by either child, mediation is final." Gideon whispered something sharply to his lawyer, who paled slightly. Then came the moment I hadn't even planned, but welcomed all the same. The family lawyer, flipping through both wills, paused. "There's a mirrored clause in the notarized version submitted by Mr. Rain as well. One that was, conveniently, omitted in the summary provided to us." He looked up and read, "If disputed, the beneficiary who maintained financial contribution and no defamation during the estate processing retains control." The room dropped into silence. My attorney slid forward printed screenshots of Gideon's LinkedIn post, Facebook tributes, and a bank report showing 0 payments made toward Dad's care. A side-by-side with mine. I didn't have to say a word. Gideon tried to recover. "She's twisting this, using legal tricks." The judge cut him off. "You were given every opportunity to act in good faith. Your own actions speak loudest now." Vera made a noise in the back, like a scoff or a sigh. I didn't turn to her. Instead, I faced the panel, spine straight. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just stood there and let the truth settle where it belonged. When it was over, I walked out of that room slower than I'd walked in, but lighter. No cameras, no headlines, just quiet air and the soft scrape of shoes on tile. Hours later, I was home, sitting on my porch with a glass of iced tea when my phone buzzed. A message from Gideon. "You're proud of ruining me?" I stared at it for a second, then typed, "No, I'm proud of surviving you." And hit send. The days that followed the hearing were quieter than I expected. Not the kind of quiet that settles over a room once you've turned off the TV, but the kind that lingers after someone has slammed a door and walked away for good. Final. Weightless. I didn't hear from anyone in the family. No messages, no calls, no half-hearted attempts at peacemaking or toxic olive branches disguised as checking in. Instead, I focused on the parts of life that didn't revolve around courtrooms and custody of memory. I read novels I'd meant to read for years. I reorganized my kitchen. I planted basil and tomatoes on the small patio outside my sliding door. Watching something grow felt like reclaiming space, even if it was just in a ceramic pot. But sometimes silence doesn't last. On a Thursday morning, with sun filtering through my living room blinds, I opened the family group chat on a whim. I hadn't contributed in months, maybe longer. Still, there was a part of me, small, persistent, that wanted to believe the dust had settled. That maybe, just maybe, after all the shouting and silence, someone might be willing to remember that we'd once shared a life beyond a fight. So I posted a photo. Just one. Dad and I on a dock. He was laughing, really laughing, the kind that creased his eyes. I'd snapped it during one of our last fishing trips. I typed, "He loved this day." No hashtags, no follow-up, just that. 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed. "You've been removed from the group." No explanation, no reply, no warning, just gone. I stared at the screen for a moment, not sad, not angry, just clear. They didn't just want to ignore me. They wanted me erased. Not legally, not in writing, but in the space where families pretend to stay connected. A digital exile. Easier than facing what they'd done. I deleted the thread. Then I whispered, to no one in particular. This was the final favor they gave me. Freedom. I set the phone down, stood, and walked to the kitchen. Poured myself a glass of water. The act felt ceremonial somehow. I wasn't in mourning anymore. I was in motion. That afternoon, I opened my laptop and browsed weekend flights. I didn't want a getaway that required explanations. I just wanted distance. I booked a small cabin near the coast, somewhere with salt air and nothing but books, waves, and my own company. First solo trip I'd taken in years. Not because I was lonely, but because I finally wasn't. As I packed a weekend bag, I glanced at the group photo on the mantel. The last one we'd taken as a whole family, years ago before the cracks showed. I didn't feel anything for it anymore. No tug, no ache. I left it there. Let it gather dust with the rest of the things they chose to forget. On the way to the airport, I got one last text. From a cousin I hadn't heard from since the funeral. "Just so you know, people are still talking about you in the group." I smiled at the screen, then typed, "They'll talk about me in that group, but I'll be too far away to hear." The ocean looked different when you weren't carrying weight on your back. 3 weeks after the ruling, I stood on the small balcony of my new place, an apartment tucked at the edge of a quiet neighborhood that didn't care who your father was or what your last name used to mean. The trees rustled like they were applauding, and for once, I let the sound in without resisting it. The morning was simple: a cup of chamomile tea, a pen that finally glided across my journal pages without hesitation, a tomato plant growing against all odds in a cracked pot I'd rescued from a thrift store. Peace didn't announce itself. It just settled in when you stopped expecting someone else to deliver it. I wasn't waking up early to brace for another blow. There were no family threads to scan for passive-aggressive landmines, no lawyers to call. Just me, a garden I was learning to trust, and space. While organizing books on a shelf I'd built with my own hands, I found a novel I'd started years ago. Inside was a folded page, yellowed at the corners. I opened it to find a letter I'd written to Dad. Never sent, long before the estate war, back when I still thought we had time. I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe I'll find the courage to say it, maybe not. But I miss the parts of you that were never allowed to soften. I hope someday you see the woman I became, and I hope you're proud. Not because I followed your rules, but because I found my own. I smiled. Not sadly, genuinely, because I had. Later that week, as I returned from the local library, the building manager flagged me down. "Someone left this for you," he said, holding out a small manila envelope. "No return address." Inside was a photo. Dad, holding a fishing rod, wearing a ridiculous sun hat I'd begged him to wear once, just for laughs. On the back, in thick, steady handwriting, "For Serena, the one who remembered the whole man, not just the father." Arthur Deems, I stared at the photo longer than I meant to, not because I needed the validation, but because there's something sacred about being remembered by someone who saw it all and didn't flinch. That evening, I walked to the park down the block. Kids laughed. A couple argued over whether they'd missed their turn on a map. Dogs barked. Life hummed, indifferent and generous. A neighbor waved from their balcony. "You've got the calmest energy on this floor," she said. I laughed. "Don't let the tea and sandals fool you. It took a war to get here." She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. The librarian had emailed earlier that day. She'd read my online post about grief and legacy and wanted me to speak at a memoir night next month. I hesitated at first, then wrote back, I'd be honored. Legacy wasn't what you leave behind for others to fight over. It was what you chose to live forward. That night, I sat on the same balcony where the morning had started. The breeze had picked up. My tea was cold, but I didn't mind. I thought about Arthur Deems, about the look in my father's eyes during our last fishing trip, about all the truths that were buried not because they were dangerous, but because they were inconvenient. And now, they were mine. I looked ahead, not back. Some people inherit property. I inherited the truth. And that's something no one can contest. If you've ever fought for your place in your own family, you're not alone. Comment below where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels.